So this morning, I want to just take just a couple of minutes, and I just want to share just a simple thought with you, just for a few moments. It was really awesome that we had structured this service in this manner already, where we were just going to have a short sermon and go back into worship and have an extended time of worship so that we can encounter God this morning. So I kind of want to just highlight and hit a few things that Pastor talked about last week, and then I want to share just a couple of small things with you real fast. We've been talking about for a really long time this idea that we depend on God, right? We've been in this for a while now. The one before that was we don't do life alone, right? But we've been in we depend on God, and there are so many different ways that you can approach this area of depending on God. And this morning I want to share with you just real briefly on that He is enough. That God is enough, that through all the things that we go through in life, all the challenges, all the difficulties, all the struggles that we have in life, that God is enough. It's a simple thing. It's a simple thing to say. It's a simple thing to speak about, but I want to remind you that He's enough. Pastor Jason talked last week about Elijah, if you remember, if you were here last week or if you tuned in last week, and how God provided food and water for him in the desert. He was in the middle of a drought, and he had a brook that He provided for him, and He gave him all the food that he needed and all the things that he needed all the drink that he needed, and birds came and gave him food, right? And eventually that brook dried up, right? And Pastor talked about how, the different emotions that maybe Elijah was going through. But Elijah continued to do what God told him to do, even though things were hard, things were challenging, things got tough. I don't know if you were able to relate, or if you are able to relate this morning. Maybe God's speaking to you and leading you, and maybe you've experienced this, maybe you haven't. I know I have. And it seems like everything starts off real good, that the plans come together, that things just start to happen, that things that you weren't sure were going to happen all of a sudden just happen. Flights happen the way they're supposed to, and a job opportunity comes right at the right time, and a house comes on the market that's exactly what you need for your family, or whatever it may be. These different opportunities just happen to just start falling into place because you're following the leading of God. And I think sometimes we're all in it. This is where God's called me to go. This is what God's called me to do. I'm going to go do it. I'm going to pursue what God's called me to pursue, and everything just falls into place. But then sometimes things begin to get a little bit more challenging. They get a little bit harder, right? Things don't always work out just as easily and quickly as they were when we first started. Things get a little bit more challenging. We get to a place where maybe we're not hearing God's voice so clearly anymore. And then we begin to doubt, and we begin to question, is this really the place that God's called me to be? Is this really the thing that God's called me to do? Is this really the job opportunity that God's called me to be in? And we begin to doubt it. And I want to remind you, and it's part of what Pastor was talking about last week, that we need to stay the course. It's easy to get distracted, and it's easy to go, well, nothing's happening, and God's not speaking to me, so I need to do something, right? We immediately want to grab hold of the reins and take over, right? But Elijah, he continued to do what God told him to do. And I don't know if maybe you can relate to that this morning, that maybe there's an area of your life where you feel that way, that God told you a specific thing and gave you a specific direction, and maybe right now you're feeling like, man, I don't know if I heard the voice of God right? And maybe you need some encouragement this morning. But I want to encourage you to stay on course, to stay the direction that God told you. Here's something that I've learned in my life, is that when God speaks and when He tells you to do something, that you need to stay on course, even if it doesn't feel good. And until God gives you direction to do something different, you need to continue to do what He originally told you to do, because He hasn't given you any other direction yet. Right? Would you agree with that? I don't know how many times in my life, I can't even count on one hand or even two, of the times that I felt like God has directed me to something, and I did it, and I followed it, and like I just said, some things just fell into place, and things were working out. And then I began to doubt the direction of God. And I thought maybe I should change course, or maybe I should do something different. And then I'm very quickly reminded, stay on course. Because maybe you're not hearing my voice right now. Maybe you're not hearing my direction right now, but this is what I've told you to do, so continue to do that until I tell you something different. there's a Bible reading plan that my wife and I are in. We do it every year. We go through the Bible chronologically over the course of a year. And we're in Kings right now, the first and second Kings. And as I was preparing yesterday for this, I was very quickly reminded about King David, just because we're in this and because I love the story of King David to begin with, but this just immediately reminded me of it. And I'm going to just give you we totally do not have time to go through the entire story of David. It would take way too long, and we don't have the time to do that today. But I'm going to give you the Jase Cliff Notes of the story of David. So bear with me. David was the runt of his family, okay? I say the runt because he wasn't even valued enough to be a part of the rest of the family when it was time to be anointed as the next king, right? And all of his other brothers were there at this party and hanging out and getting inspected to be the next king, and David wasn't even invited. He was out in the field watching the sheep because he was of such little value that they didn't even care that he was there. Yet David was selected as the next king of Israel, if you know the story. David had a roller coaster in his life, a roller coaster of ups and downs. All kinds of things happened in his life. There were some amazing things that happened. Like single-handedly, David killed bears and lions. David even killed a giant called Goliath, if you're familiar with that story. And there's all these amazing things that David did throughout his life. But he was also hated by King Saul, because King Saul knew that he was the next heir to the throne, and King Saul wanted to get rid of him. And so he was being hunted by King Saul, and King Saul was trying to kill him, right? And even later on in his life, even after he became king, one of his sons betrayed him and tried to take over, and all these other things happened. And there was this roller coaster of things that took place in David's life. But I believe that through all of it, there were some times where, he did a lot of things that he shouldn't have done, right? We know that. But I think throughout his life, he always depended on God. He always turned back to God. And one of my favorite books of the Bible that I really enjoy reading is the book of Psalms. And in the book of Psalms, it kind of talks about the things that David went through in his life and the ups and the downs and how in every area he always depended on God. He always turned back to God. And how for us that when we're in doubt, when we're unsure, when we're not sure what our next step is, we've got to turn to God. We've got to depend on God. And there's this scripture verse I want to read, and I'm not going to take very long, but I just want to share this with you real quick. And I'm sure you may know the scripture verse by heart if you've read scripture for a very long amount of time. It's in Psalms 23, verses 1 through 6. And it goes like this. The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right path for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil. For you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table for me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. You can read this scripture verse and you can think, man, that's a great scripture verse, right? Or a great section of scripture. And just move on. And I'll be honest with you, I've been guilty of this. You read that section of scripture and man, that's encouraging. Cool. Let's go on to the next thing. I think that there's times in our lives where we move way too fast. When we're in too big of a hurry to go to the next thing, and we don't take the time to slow down and listen to God and hear God's voice. As I was reading this scripture verse, I really felt impressed to share this verse with you this morning. And as I was preparing and as I was reading through this verse over and over again, I felt like God began to give me some insight into this section of scripture. And I wanted to share it with you this morning. If you really think about it, David had been a shepherd, right? That's what he was doing when he was a young boy. He was a shepherd. He knew a lot about sheep. He knew what they ate. He knew what they drank. He knew where they liked to be. He knew what area of the pasture was the best for them. He knew all these things about the sheep, right? Because he was a shepherd. And in this particular scripture, I feel like David was relating to the sheep and referring to God as the shepherd. And that's how I'm going to approach it as we go through this really quickly, as we break down this scripture. Verse 1, the Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. I look at verse 1, and this is what I see. When we're with the shepherd, we're safe. It says we lack nothing. So that means that we have all that we need. When we submit to the shepherd, we have all that we need. We lack nothing because he supplies all of our needs. Verse 2. We can relax because we know that he'll protect us. He'll keep us safe. And sometimes he'll even run off the wolves and the lions and all the predators, and we won't even realize what's going on because we're too busy grazing in the field. Verse 3, we're refreshed by him. That when we're in his presence, that God takes care of us and he watches over us and he refreshes our soul. The latter part of verse 3, he guides me along the right path for his name's sake. This is a hard one sometimes. He leads us the right way, the way he intends us to go. Because as the shepherd, he knows the way, right? Think about David, and he was leading his sheep for I don't know how long, right? And he knew where to go. He knew where to take his sheep. He knew what path to lead his sheep down and what areas to go to and what pastures to be in and what places to avoid, what places had lots of predators that he needed to try and avoid. And so the shepherd knew the way. And so the sheep have to trust that the shepherd knows the way and that we've got to lean in and depend on God, right? A sheep can try and wander off and do his own thing, but most of the time you get in trouble when you do that. Verse 4, even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Even though a portion of the path or the journey for us may be hard, it may be treacherous, at times it may be really challenging, but we know that God is with us. We've got nothing to fear because he's by our side. He's leading us and guiding us, even though it looks scary. Right? You go right back to that again, that maybe there's some areas that David had to lead his sheep through, some areas that were scary for the sheep, but maybe that was the only way that they could go. And so that was the way that David led them. And the sheep had to trust that David knew what he was doing because he's the shepherd and he's leading them, right? And that's how we have to be with God. There's some things in our life that maybe this path is really wide and it's really great and there's green grass all around us and everything's awesome, but then we get to this narrow area where there's rocks all around us and there's things that we can't see, and we have to trust God in even those areas that we don't understand and we're afraid of, right? We've got to trust that he's in control. Verse 5, you prepare a table for me in the presence of my enemies. Man, I love this. You prepare a table for me in the presence of my enemies. God says, I'm going to make a pit stop right here, right in the middle of your chaos, right in the middle of your stuff, your garbage, all the things that are going on. And we're going to stop right here, and we're going to take a break, and you're going to eat some lunch, and we're going to hang out. Even though there's predators coming from every angle and predators all around that want to steal from you and kill you and destroy you, the shepherd's going to protect you. Because he knows that this area that we're in right here is a good area for you to be in, even if it doesn't feel like it. That right in the middle of your enemies, he's going to prepare a table. I almost look at that and go like God's going, ha, devil, in your face. I'm going to make a meal right here, and we're going to sit here and eat when you're trying to attack us and kill us, right? That's how I see that. That God is going to protect us and be with us even right in the middle of all the stuff that we're going through. The end of verse 5, You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. He's pouring out blessings on our lives, even when we don't realize it. Even when we don't realize it. I promise you, and I'm saying this from my own experience, that you can be right in the middle of something and not realize that God's blessing is all over it. And you can be right in the middle of dealing with hard stuff and difficult stuff and challenging things and think, man, where is God in the middle of this? And then you get through it and you get on the other side of it. And then you get to look back and go, man, God was right here during this, and God was right here during that, and God was holding my hand during this situation, and I didn't even realize it. God's going to anoint your head with oil. He's going to pour out blessing in your life. And so much so that your cup is going to overflow. I go back to that brook. When your brook runs dry, where do you go? You go to the Father. You go to God. When your cup is empty and you have nothing else, you run to God, because he says, when you come to me, your cup is going to overflow. I'm going to give you more than you need. He's going to lead us to those streams that are vast and we can drink all that we want, right? And here's the end that sums up this whole scripture. Verse 6, surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. As the shepherd, God's saying, I'm right by your side. I'm blessing you and loving you, even if sometimes you don't feel it or realize it. I'm right here, right by you. That I'm going to follow you. My goodness is going to follow you all the days of your life. I'm going to love you through all of this stuff. Here's the other thing I see is at the end of the scripture, I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. I read that and I look at it and I think, God's saying, come into my house and you can have whatever you want. Come into my house and I'll give you whatever you need. Whatever need you have, I'm going to supply it, right? You read that story of knock and keep on knocking, ask and keep on asking, right? And it'll be given to you. I think about that right here, that we'll dwell in the house of the Lord forever. How many of you have friends in your life where you can go over to their house and you can just open up their refrigerator and get whatever you want out of it? Does anybody have friends like that? I've got friends like that. You just walk into their house and, hey, what's going on, man? And you go right to their refrigerator and get a drink of tea or get whatever right out of the refrigerator, right? You can go sit on just lounge back on their couch. You don't even have to ask, right? My aunt is amazing. She's I don't want to say this too loud on camera, but she's probably my favorite aunt on my dad's side. She's a little bit closer to my age, so she's a lot more relatable than my other aunts. And she lives in the great state of Texas. Yes. She's in San Antonio, and often we'll vacation there, and we'll go visit her, and we'll go do Six Flags and all the fun stuff in San Antonio, and we'll stay with her at her house. And every single time that we go to San Antonio, we're expected to stay with her. Like, it's not even an option to go get a hotel. It's, you're staying at my house with me. And my aunt makes us feel like her house is our house. She makes us feel like we're right at home. So much so that she even gives up her bed for us. Like, the first time that we went there, and she's like, oh yeah, you're sleeping in my room. I'm like, wait, what? We can sleep on the couch, or we can sleep in, somewhere else. She's like, no, you're sleeping in my room. I'm like, I don't even know if I would do that, right? And it's just so awesome to be that invited in somewhere where somebody's going to give up their bed for you and make you feel like you're right at home. And that's how I think about this part of Scripture, that God's saying, hey, come on in. Come on in. Get in my refrigerator and get whatever you want out of it. Come on in. And are you tired? Cool. I've got 1 million beds in my house. You can pick whichever one is the most comfortable, and you lay down and you take a nap. Throw back on the couch, kick off your shoes, and just hang out in my presence. Get the rest you need. That's what I feel like this section of Scripture is saying, right? That we can get into the house of God and we can have all that we need. Anything that we need. If you remember our section of Scripture for the year, it's found in John 17:10. It goes, all I have is yours, and all you have is mine. Isn't that awesome? That as we come into the presence of God and as we seek the presence of God, He gives us all that He has. It's all ours for the taking. Maybe for some of you today, maybe that's what you need. Maybe there's an area of your life where your brook has run dry, and you need to come into the presence of God, and you need to get a drink. You need to get a drink from the living water of God. Maybe for some of you, life has gotten crazy and gotten busy and gotten chaotic, and you need to just slow down and take a rest. I feel like I can relate to that one. I need to take a rest and slow down. That life is crazy, life is busy. Well, when you come into the presence of God, you can find rest. Right? There's a scripture that says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Right? I feel like this morning that we need to maybe slow down just a little bit, that we're too quick to move to the next thing. We're in too big of a hurry to go to the next thing, that we don't slow down and take time to hear the voice of God, to listen for the voice of God, to tune in to the voice of God. And so that's what I'm asking of you this morning. We're going to go back into a time of worship here in a few moments. And I want you to take some time, whatever area of your life you need to be in the presence of God for, I want to challenge you to do that this morning. Whatever area of your life that you need God to just come and encounter, you need God to just come and meet you in that area, I promise as you begin to pursue God in that area, I promise He's going to meet you. I think for some of us too, that when we get in that area of our life where we're unsure of the direction of God, we're unsure of where God's taking us, we have a tendency as humans to want to take charge of that, to try to do something on our own. And well, God's not moving fast enough, or this isn't happening the way I think it should happen. And so I'm going to take charge and I'm going to try to make it happen. And God's saying, no, slow down and wait for me, because I have a plan and I'm going to get you where you need to go. Just wait on me. Don't be in a hurry. Don't rush it. Don't try to make it happen, but wait on me. And I promise you it's going to be so much better when we wait on God than if we try to do it ourselves. And so this morning, I don't know where you find yourself in any of this area, but I want to encourage you. We're going to go back into some worship here for a little bit. We're going to sing some worship songs and take some time. Do what you need to do. If that means staying in your seat, if that means standing, if that means coming to the altar, whatever that means, whatever that looks like for you, let's take these next moments, these next intended moments, and let's press into the presence of God. Because I believe that that's where God meets us, that when we're worshiping Him, when we're pressing into Him, that's when God's going to meet us. We're also gonna take communion together this morning, and actually, if you would, let's all stand this morning. We're going to go back into a time of worship, and as we start to do that, our hospitality team is going to come and hand out the elements to you this morning. Just hold on to those, and after worship is over, I'll give you some more direction on that. But guys, let's take a few moments and let's pursue the presence of God this morning. When I was up here earlier and I was talking about maybe there's some things in your life that you need this morning, believe for them this morning. I'm believing for you this morning. I'm believing for some areas in my life this morning that God's going to do some things. God's going to cause some healings to happen. God's going to cause some doors to open. God's going to speak to those dry places that maybe you haven't heard the voice of God for a while and you're struggling and you need to hear the voice of God. Press in, and I promise you God's going to speak to you this morning.